All right, let's dive in. Today we're taking a look at a film that's, well, it's pretty out there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Häxan. Maybe you know it as The Witches.
Hmm?
The full title is Häxan, Witchcraft Through the Ages, which kind of gives you a hint of what we're getting into.
I see.
It's this crazy mix of documentary and horror. It digs into all those historical beliefs about witchcraft, but then it goes a step further and connects it to mental health.
Wow, for a film from 1922, that's pretty forward-thinking.
Right. It's like it's a product of its time, but also way ahead of its time.
Definitely.
And get this, we've got a whole bunch of sources for this deep dive. We've got old reviews, some historical context pieces, even a study guide.
Wow, a real mix.
Yeah. So be prepared for some surprises because we're going to uncover some pretty wild visuals,
I bet.
seriously impressive special effects, especially for the 1920s, and a message that still has people talking a century later.
It really speaks to the lasting power of this film, doesn't it?
Totally. So let's unpack this. For those who haven't had the dot pleasure, what exactly is Häxan?
Okay, picture this. The silent film era, 1922. And suddenly this film drops, and it's unlike anything people have ever seen. It's part documentary, part dramatic reenactment. Almost like those, true crime documentaries we see everywhere these days.
Ah, I see.
It's a journey through the history of witchcraft, all those beliefs and practices from the Middle Ages all the way up to the 1920s.
And it was written and directed by Benjamin Christensen, who also plays the devil in the film. Talk about a triple threat.
Right. He was a true visionary.
So one of the things that jumps out at you when you see Häxan is the visuals.
Oh, absolutely. It's visually stunning.
Striking, even. Especially for a film made in the 1920s. How did they even pull that off back then?
Well, Christensen was very meticulous about creating the right atmosphere.
I can imagine.
He insisted on filming at night, even in the studio, to get that kind of eerie, nocturnal feel.
That makes sense.
And then, to create the effect of witches flying, they built this incredibly detailed miniature town on a rotating turntable. It's remarkable what they were able to achieve.
I mean, that's pretty ingenious.
Absolutely. And Christensen was really willing to experiment.
So it wasn't just the sets and the atmosphere. They used special effects, too.
Oh, yeah. They used everything from puppetry and stop-motion animation to what they call dot superimposition, to create these, unsettling images of witches flying over villages and things like that.
I bet that was pretty groundbreaking for the time.
Oh, it was. It helped establish Häxan as a visual masterpiece, really.
So we've established that it's visually impressive, but what about the content?
Right. So at its core, Häxan is exploring the historical context of witchcraft. And it draws heavily on this book, the Malleus Maleficarum.
Oh, okay.
It was essentially a witch hunting guide from the 15th century.
Yeah.
And it played a huge role in shaping how people viewed witchcraft.
Oh, I see.
So the film uses that book as a framework to examine all these beliefs and practices associated with witchcraft throughout history.
So it's not for the faint of heart, I'm guessing.
No, it's pretty intense. The film shows witch trials, torture, even the witch's Sabbath, often in graphic detail.
Wow.
Yeah, these scenes were quite controversial at the time.
I can imagine.
They can still shock audiences today, to be honest.
So we've got historical context, disturbing visuals, and some pretty impressive special effects wizardry. But there's more to it than that, right?
You're absolutely right. Häxan isn't just a horror film. It also has this really thought-provoking commentary on the treatment of women in a patriarchal society.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, remember the Malleus Maleficarum. It played a big part in perpetuating all those harmful stereotypes about women, associating them with witchcraft.
Right, right.
So Christensen is deliberately drawing parallels between the persecution of witches and the struggles that women faced in his own time.
So he's using the historical context to make a statement about the present.
Exactly. There's this one part where he juxtaposes scenes of medieval witch trials with footage from 20th century mental institutions. It's almost like he's suggesting a link between how society treated, deviant women in the past and how women who didn't conform to social expectations were treated in the 1920s.
Wow, that's a pretty insightful connection.
And this whole idea of connecting witch hunts and the treatment of the mentally ill leads us to one of the film's most fascinating aspects, Christensen's hypothesis.
Which is?
He proposes that many accused witches were actually suffering from mental illnesses that were misunderstood at the time.
That's a pretty radical idea for 1922.
It is, and it's what makes Häxan so relevant even today.
So the film is making us question how we view history and how we understand mental health.
Exactly. It's making us consider how those perceptions can be shaped by societal norms and biases.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this film is considered so groundbreaking, but before we move on, I'm curious about something.
Okay, what's that?
So we've talked about all this, the historical context, the visuals, Christensen's hypothesis, but what about Christensen's own beliefs? Do we know where he stood on all this? Like with religion and the devil and witchcraft?
That's a great question. And honestly, it's one that scholars have been debating for years.
Mm.
Some people think he was using the film to critique organized religion,
Yeah.
how it played a role in persecuting those who were seen as different or heretical.
Mhm.
Others believe he was more interested in exploring the psychology of superstition and fear, regardless of religious affiliation.
So there's no easy answer.
Not really.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Häxan so fascinating. It's a film that's open to multiple
It
interpretations.
sounds like it really makes you think.
Absolutely. It challenges you to grapple with some complex questions about history, belief, and human nature.
I'm getting the sense that watching Häxan is less about getting definitive answers and more about like having a conversation with the film.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's a film that demands active viewing. You have to think critically. It's not just entertainment. It's an experience.
Okay, I'm officially intrigued. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I think we need to dig a little deeper into what makes Häxan so unique in terms of its structure and how it influenced other films.
Absolutely. Let's delve into that next.
Yeah.
When we talk about what makes Häxan so unique, its structure is a great place to start.
Yeah, it's not like those straightforward narratives you usually see.
Right. It's not your typical beginning, middle, and end kind of film.
So how is it structured?
It's more like a visual essay, I guess you could
It's a
say.
visual essay.
Yeah, like it's divided into these distinct parts, and each one takes you through a different aspect of witchcraft and its history.
Okay, so it's not just one long story.
No, think of it like a journey through time. It starts with this documentary style section.
Mm-hmm.
That's where Christensen lays out the historical context of witchcraft. He pulls from sources like that Malleus Maleficarum we talked about.
Oh, right, the witch hunting guide.
Exactly. He explains how these beliefs came about, how they were perceived, and, well, the horrible things that happened because of those perceptions.
So he's really setting the stage for everything that comes later.
Exactly. And then, boom, the film shifts gears.
Oh.
Yeah, it goes into these dramatic reenactments, bringing those historical accounts to life.
I bet that's where things get really intense.
It does. These reenactments are mostly set in the Middle Ages. They show everything from daily life back then to specific events like witch trials and the witches' Sabbath.
And then it jumps forward to the 20th century with those scenes in the mental institutions.
You got it. The film kind of culminates with Christensen's commentary on how those old beliefs about witchcraft connect to how we see mental health today.
I see. So it's like he's drawing a line between the past and the present.
Exactly. Bringing the audience full circle,
Yeah.
making them think about those connections. Like maybe we're not as far removed from those dark chapters of history as we like to believe.
It's like he's saying, look, we might think we're so advanced now, but are we really that different?
Exactly. That's part of what makes this film so powerful, It challenges us to look at our own prejudices and assumptions.
It makes you think about how fear and ignorance can lead to some pretty awful things.
Absolutely. It's a message that's incredibly relevant even today.
Yeah, especially when you see how quickly misinformation can spread.
Oh, for sure. But, before we go too deep in all that, I think it's worth appreciating some of the details that make Häxan so visually stunning.
Oh, definitely. Like what?
Well, we talked about that miniature town they built on a turntable to make the witches fly.
Right.
That's just one example of how dedicated Christensen was to realizing his vision. He was amazing with practical effects.
Like he didn't have CGI or anything like that.
Nope. No fancy computers.
Oh,
He created those flying witches, the creatures, the scenes of the Sabbath, all without modern technology.
that's wild.
It's a testament to how creative and skilled those filmmakers were.
And those effects weren't just for show, right?
No, they serve a purpose.
Mm.
They add to that unsettling atmosphere, amplifying the sense of dread.
Like he was saying, I'm going to show you things you've never seen before, make you feel things you've never felt.
Exactly. It's a film that sticks with you, and the visuals are a big part of that.
Okay, so we've talked structure, the visuals, the historical context. But what about characters? Are there any we should be paying attention to?
Definitely. Häxan might not have a traditional plot, but there are characters whose stories help you understand the themes.
Like who?
Well, there's Maria, the Weaver.
Oh, yeah, she's the one accused of witchcraft, right?
Yeah. She's a tragic figure, represents all those innocent people, especially women, who were caught up in the witch hunts. We see her tortured, forced to confess to things she probably never did.
It's hard to imagine going through something like that.
Absolutely. And then there's Anna, the printer's wife.
She's the one who goes to the Inquisitors for help, but ends up accused herself.
Right. Her story is especially heartbreaking because it shows just how unpredictable those witch hunts were. Anyone could be targeted.
Even those seeking help.
Exactly. It highlights that atmosphere of fear and suspicion that was everywhere back then.
It adds a whole other layer to the film's message, doesn't it?
For sure. And of course, we can't forget the Inquisitors themselves.
The ones who are driving the witch hunts.
Yeah, they embody that dogma and fear, those forces that fueled the persecutions.
It's a reminder of how much damage people in power can do.
A cautionary tale, for sure. But, Häxan isn't just about the past.
Right. It's about how those patterns of fear and persecution can keep happening.
Exactly. So, when you watch Häxan, there are a few things to keep in mind.
Okay, what should I be looking for?
First, remember it's like a visual essay, not a typical story. Be ready for a series of vignettes, exploring different aspects of witchcraft.
Got it.
And pay attention to how Christensen mixes those documentary elements with the dramatic reenactments.
So it's more about the ideas and the visuals than a clear-cut plot.
Exactly. And second, look for the visual connections between the historical stuff and Christensen's commentary on modern society, like those scenes of the witch trials and the mental institutions.
Oh, okay. It's like he's saying, don't think we're so different from those people back then.
You got it. Häxan is all about recognizing those recurring patterns. Asking ourselves, what are we doing today that might seem barbaric later on?
It really makes you think.
It does. And that brings us to another important part of Häxan's legacy, its influence on horror movies. It was a pioneering film in a lot of ways.
Now that you mention it, I can totally see the connections to films like The Exorcist.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And The Witch, they have that same eerie atmosphere, that sense of dread.
Yeah, and they both explore the darker side of belief and the occult.
Exactly. And it's not just the themes either. Häxan's special effects were really influential. All those stop-motion creatures, those surreal scenes.
It's pretty amazing that a film from 1922 can still feel so relevant, especially visually.
It speaks to Christensen's talent.
Totally. So this film was banned when it first came out, right?
Yeah, in some places. Can you imagine the reactions back then?
Yeah.
All those scenes of torture and,
Yeah.
Everything else. It was shocking.
I bet.
People called for it to be banned.
Oh.
Some even accused Christensen of, summoning the devil.
I wonder what it was like to be in one of those early screenings.
It must have been wild. But thankfully, some people saw the artistic merit in it.
Like they understood what he was trying to do.
Exactly. Artists, intellectuals, even some critics came to its defense. And thank goodness they did, because it meant that the film was preserved.
Yeah, it could have been lost forever.
Exactly. And now, look at it. It's on streaming platforms. It's in fancy collections. It's reached a whole new audience.
What do you think Christensen would make of that?
I like to think he'd be thrilled. He was a filmmaker who wanted to push boundaries, make people think. And Häxan is still doing that today. It's a film that sparks debate, invites different interpretations.
It's been a fascinating deep dive. We've covered so much ground: the historical context, the visuals, the commentary on mental illness, social control.
We have. It's amazing how much there is to unpack.
So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you really hope people take away from this?
Well, I think it all comes back to that big question we talked about. If so many accused witches were just misunderstood, what does that say about how we judge those who are different?
It's a powerful question.
It is. It makes you think about all the ways we label and categorize people, often based on fear, not understanding.
This deep dive wasn't just about a film.
No, it's about understanding ourselves a little better.
And it's definitely given me a lot to think about.
That's what great art does. It challenges us, pushes us out of our comfort zones. Häxan is definitely a film that stays with you.
I'm actually feeling the urge to watch it now.
I have a feeling you're going to enjoy it. And if you want to learn even more, there's so much out there. Books, articles, even other podcasts.
I'll be checking those out.
Perfect. Until next time, keep exploring. It's really something that a film like this, from 1922, a silent film no less, is still so easy to find today.
I know, right? It's not like some lost relic buried in a film archive somewhere.
Exactly. It's out there on streaming platforms, part of those curated collections like Criterion. It's not fading away anytime soon.
Which is amazing considering how much it pushed the boundaries back then.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
Its journey hasn't exactly been smooth sailing, Remember all that censorship we talked about?
Yeah, I was reading about how it was actually banned in several countries when it first came out.
Exactly. I mean, just imagine seeing those scenes for the first time in 1922. The torture, the nudity, those demonic rituals. It was a whole other level of shocking.
It really makes you wonder what those first audiences thought.
Oh, I bet there was some gasps and pearl clutching for sure. But even with all that backlash, there were those who saw Häxan for what it was.
People who understood what Christensen was trying to do.
Exactly. Artists, intellectuals, even some critics recognized it as something special. They praised the visuals, the themes, the way it blended documentary and horror.
It just goes to show that what shocks one generation can become art to another.
That's so true. And luckily, those early supporters really fought for Häxan. They made sure it wasn't lost to censorship or just forgotten over time.
And now, thanks to them, we have it today.
Yeah, it's incredible to think it went from being banned to being considered a cinematic treasure.
And now it's more accessible than ever. I wonder what Christensen would think, seeing his film reach such a wide audience all these years later.
Honestly, I think he'd be pretty happy. He wanted to push buttons, challenge people's thinking, and Häxan still does that today. It sparks debates, makes you come up with your own interpretations.
We've really gone deep on this one. We've explored the history, the visuals, the social commentary, Christensen's ideas about mental illness.
It's been quite a journey.
As we wrap up, is there one key takeaway you want listeners to walk away with?
Well, out of everything we've discussed, I think it comes back to that central question. What if those accused of witchcraft were simply misunderstood? What does that say about how we treat those who are different?
That's such a powerful thought.
It makes you look at our own society, our own biases. It makes you realize how fear and ignorance can lead to some pretty dark places.
I think I'm finally ready to watch Häxan, knowing all of this.
You'll have to tell me what you think. And remember, if you want to explore more, there's a ton of stuff out there. Books, articles, you name it.
I know just where to find them.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Häxan. Until next time, keep exploring and keep those questions coming.